Derek Rodriguez with my colleagues Alex Christodolo. He is Alex. Retake. Derek Rodriguez, my colleagues Alex Christodolo. Derek Rodriguez. I'm here with my colleagues Alex Christodolo and Nicholas Johnson. We worked this semester on a project called SCL and HCI, Physiological Measures of User State. So user state is important for HCI research because the way we act during the way we feel during our tasks, whether we're engaged or anxious or angry, can affect our performance. So I think in particular in information search about a project that Carol Krultal ran in the late 80s and early 90s, investigating the information search process. And she found that when students were engaged in timed tasks or research tasks, that they were anxious when they had an information problem where they did not understand the way the information space was created. So there was a mismatch between their mental model of the information space and what she called a bibliographic paradigm. Alleviating that uncertainty should alleviate that anxiety and improve performance. So our study was designed to try to understand user state by using physiological measures. Typically in HCI, we use self-reports to assess physiological state. How were you feeling during the task? Were you upset? Were you angry? And these are usually self-reports that are conducted in controlled experiments. So they're not very naturalistic. We think, and many people in the HCI field do believe that physiological measures offer a possible solution to this problem. They are objective, that is, they're out of the subject's control, and there are many different measures available that have been useful in the field, including heart rate, gaze, blood pressure, respiration, and skin conductance level. These measures have been shown over, frankly, 100 years. Different measures have been used in different ways to understand user state, but they've been shown to correlate well with anxiety and engagement and such. Another advantage that these tools provide is the opportunity to solicit implicit input. So we could actually explore user state in a naturalistic way without forcing the user to participate in a controlled experiment. So we set out to explore this issue in this project. In particular, we focus on skin conductance level because it is a very well-known tool for measuring user state. What is skin conductance? Skin conductance is actually the inverse of skin resistance, if you will. You measure it by passing electricity through your body. And why does this make sense? Well, there's an autonomic response to external stimuli in our bodies which causes us to sweat. In particular in our eccrine glands, which are mostly in our hands and in the bottoms of our feet, is most notable. And so as you sweat, skin conductance level changes, and the current that is passed through your body changes in level, and the sensor can detect that. So there's another advantage, which is that we can gather both mean and point measurements. By mean measurements, what I'm talking about is the possibility to assess the average skin conductance level over a period, a critical period, perhaps a search task, or playing a video game, or waiting for a pitch at the plate. Point measurements are the ability to track instantaneous or discrete responses to discrete stimuli. So perhaps seeing a new web page appear on the screen, or having to become familiar with a car coming out of your peripheral vision. Those types of stimuli can also cause us to sweat. So this is a typical SCL measurement setup, which is, I was just mentioning, the eccrine glands are on your hands and on your feet. You'll notice there are two electrodes that are attached to the participant's hand here, and then two leads that then connect back to the sensor. And a very low voltage is passed through the sensor to do the measurement. We used a tool called Biopack. Biopack is a producer of various instruments that gather physiological data. So everything from heart rate to skin conductance level and so on. And this is a screenshot from the application. And you see here there's a wave. This is the time during this session. This is basically a graph of the skin conductance level. You saw it earlier on one of the earlier slides that we were measuring this skin conductance level in microsiemens. That's on the y-axis over here. So you can see one of those discrete stimuli and evidence right here. As you see, moving along in time, there may be a stimulus here, and there may be a little bit of a delay, and then there's a reaction as skin conductance level rises. So someone got sweaty there. The value we're interested in our study, though, was the mean. And this mean actually was computed for a much wider range than these 6 seconds that appear on the screen. But we were looking at the mean during these critical regions and comparing those to make an assessment of the utility of this measurement. So, proposed study. The product for our project is a paper which we have here, and we'll provide you, Gary, with the URL for that. Basically, we designed a user study to evaluate this. We designed 3 different interfaces. So we were evaluating information search, so skin conductance level as a measure of user state during information search, using multiple tasks and multiple user interfaces. And we gathered both subjective and objective data. Now this is important. The objective data, of course, is the skin conductance level measurements and the clickstream data. The subjective measures are frankly the person's self-reports of how they felt during the interaction. We think that's that's actually critical now as people who work in HCI to validate these measures. They have to be able to go back to something to validate the utility of SCL or heart rate variability, and they have to go back to those subjective measures to start. So we had 3 research questions. One, does the retrieval interface affect the user's psychological state? So we were looking for a difference an effect by interface. We're looking for new attributes of the retrieval task, like difficulty and domain, affect the user's psychological state. So was there a difference based on task? And then do the psychological measures like SCL reliably correlate with the user-provided subjective measures? Again, our independent variables for this project are interface and task. I'll note here a couple things about the tasks. We had tasks in 3 different domains, and we had tasks in 2 different levels. So we had what we thought were easy tasks and also difficult tasks. And then 3 different interfaces. I'll talk about it in a minute. The dependent variables are user perceptions of success, interface quality, information quality, and anxiety during the process. And we did that through, in our pilot, we did that through a verbal questionnaire. In our proposal, we actually have written questionnaires using Likert scales to assess those values. And finally, skin conductance levels, as I mentioned earlier, and we're more interested in looking at means between critical regions as opposed to trying to identify specific responses to discrete stimuli. Like I said, we have 3 different interfaces, 6 different tasks. We did design it such that users would rotate between, users would complete 2 tasks per interface, but what we'll do is we'll randomize this so that the subjects won't see the same order of interface or the same order of task. Subjects are, for this study, anyone familiar with web search. We do want folks who are engaged and aware of different search engines. The recruiting population will be the UNC student population. And sample size, of course, depends on funding. So this is our first search interface. The search engine was developed by my colleague, Nick Johnson, with the Yahoo API. So the engine behind the scenes is Yahoo here. And what Nick did is he took the API and he built a user interface around it. So you see the matching numbers, that all comes back from Yahoo. The ranking of the hits are returned based on Yahoo's algorithms. And this was what we call the blank search box approach, which is very similar to typical Google search or other interfaces. And so the participant has the only one option. They can type in searches and they can click on the button to execute the search. No other affordances in this interface. The next interface does provide several affordances. So I will point out a couple to you. First of all, we provide the user with the option to choose a Boolean operator, whether they prefer Boolean or Boolean and as the operator. They can restrict their searches to a given domain, language, format, country, and so on. Irony is, though, that this interface was actually built to be broken. Heuristically, it is unsound. For instance, you cannot see it on the screen here, but users will only see 2 hits per screen. So they're continuously scrolling between their search query and this value here. Also, every time they return to do a search, it defaults to Boolean OR, and very few search engines use Boolean OR. So it was built to be broken from the very beginning, to hopefully to try to stimulate some of that stress. And the third interface we called our usable advanced search, and it's a little friendlier, allowing the user to select the number of terms to appear in a search, in a document rather, and provides a friendly way of entering that information. But behind the scenes, it's all Yahoo. Okay, so the tasks. We had simulated work tasks. There were 3 different domains: music, university facilities, and government policy. One of the areas we needed to, we encountered in our pilot, I'll talk about it in a minute, is task complexity has to be varied. We attempted to vary task complexity in our pilot, and we don't think we got it right. So we suggest that in future studies that this be normed by pooling a group of expert users and designing the task and then parceling them out. So an example task was, for instance, you've heard recently that UNC has the best athletic facilities and recreational facilities in the area, and you're moving to the area. You want to verify that that's really true. And how do you do that? So there was another task that was a little more difficult. It said, you're moving to UNC, to Chapel Hill, and you'd like to know how many recreational facilities there are at the university. Find that number using web search. So that was supposed to be a slightly different more difficult task. Anyway, that's about the task. Okay. It was important for us to begin to gather the data, the subjective data, in an organized fashion. First, we started with a demographic questionnaire, essentially asking about age, race, background, domain knowledge, experience in search, and so on, and how often the user uses various search engines. We then used a pre-task interview where we gave them the task, like the one I just mentioned, and the user was supposed to think through how they would solve that problem, and then tell us about it. And then there is a post-task questionnaire where they're asked questions about their familiarity with the topic, how well they thought the search engine worked, and their satisfaction with their answer. There's an exit questionnaire using Likert scale to answer the same kind of questions for all 6 tasks, and then an exit interview to actually probe some of those responses. The objective data collection, we're using a couple different approaches here. One is is an interaction log, This can be done through gathering a web browser's click stream, or we could run the queries through a proxy server. But what that would do is it would give us second-by-second history of what was happening on the screen. So if we did want to go back and correlate discrete responses that we may have seen in this SEL, we could have done so. And secondly, of course, skin conductance levels. It's captured with a biopack. So the protocol, we would randomly assign system task pairs to the user, each participant. The experimenter and the subject will get settled. And this is important to get the user comfortable with the environment, because we're setting up an unnatural situation with this SCL measurement. Of course, we would provide IRB documents and receive informed consent before proceeding. Apply the demographic questionnaire to pull that data in. And we would attach the SCL leads. And it's very important at this point to tell the user a couple things, the participant a couple things. One, be still, because actually movement does seem to influence skin conductance level. And the other thing, it's very important that all of the users, it may be best to have them all wash their hands at the same time or something like that, just to standardize the amount of that's on their hands as they begin. An important factor here is the baseline reading. The baseline reading essentially is the reading of the skin conductance level at rest, and that's your level as without any stimulus at all. So you should not be the participant should not be anxious at all during that reading, and that's what we'll use to compare to the other critical regions later in the process. Finally, the experimental explains the search process, and then the user is actually presented with a task, and then can begin evaluating how they would handle that. That's the point at which we begin gathering data, and that's one of the first critical regions where we want to gather data. After they've read through it and they've come up with a plan, we ask them for their pre-task, for a little pre-task interview. How would you approach the search? Given the interface that you're supposed to use for this task and the problem at hand, how would you solve this? And then the subject is supposed to work on the task for up to 10 minutes. And then we follow with a post-task questionnaire. Post-task questionnaire is used with the Likert scales, so there's no talking during that process. Then we repeat those 4 phases for each of the tasks, follow with the exit questionnaire and the exit interview, thank them, and give them their compensation. So that's the protocol. What do we do then? We calculate the mean SCL for the 4 different time periods, the reading and planning, the explaining of the process, the search task, and then also the debriefing. Then we look for correlations between the skin conductance level and interface, task attributes, and then finally between SCL and user-reported measures. So we did conduct a pilot study. We had a user. There were slight differences from the proposed protocol, which is why the protocol's changed today. First of all, our user was not a student. The participant was actually an expert user of search systems, actually teaches information retrieval. The participant was also not a native English speaker, which actually did cause some issues with some of the debriefing phases. So, we did gather the interaction log through the browser history, and we also did keep personal logs as well, as we would note specific aspects that were happening during the process. We would jot them down and note that at 120 seconds the user started the search, or at 145 seconds the user looked puzzled, that kind of thing, to see if we could use that data as evaluation. We did use the questionnaires verbally, and that's where you'll see in a minute, you'll see how that affected SCL levels. And we had slightly different questions. But it certainly did help us refine our protocol. So this is our, these are pilot results just from the third phase of each task, which is the searching task. So you see on the y-axis here are skin conductance levels in microsiemens. Typical range for an adult is 2 to 20 during their daily life. You notice our participants' baseline SCL gathered over approximately 40 seconds was 6.4 seconds. I mean 6.4 microsiemens. During the tasks, see that on average they were, I believe the average was around 14. So there was a significant difference. So what does this tell us? That tells us, one, that our instrument was working, I think. That's an important finding here. We were gathering data that was fairly, that was well gathered throughout the process. We did actually have to tape her hand several times to make sure that it didn't come loose, but it worked out quite well. More about that later. This is also the slide where we can talk about interactions with the interface. And as so often happens, we have no findings here. If you recall the three interfaces we had the blank interface, the broken interface, and the advanced interface. And we were looking for some type of a correlation here, and we really found none. For instance, task 1 and task 4, we used the blank interface, and it doesn't seem to be any correlation there. The broken interface was used as for task 2 and task 6, and again, there doesn't seem to be any correlation there. We think there are other factors actually involved here based on what happened in between those sessions, which we'll get to in a little bit. So unfortunately, there was no effect here by interface. We'll talk a little bit more about that at when I talk about conclusions. Okay, so what does this tell us? This is looking at let's see. The pink line here is the mean SCL during all of the easy tasks. Okay, this is the 4 phases: the reading phase, planning phase, or the phase in which the participant is telling us about their search plans, the search phase, and the debriefing phase. The reading phase is a phase where they're talking, it's quiet. I mean, there's no talking, they're quiet and they're reading and planning. This is a talking phase here, and so is this one here. And so it's clear to us that talking, and this is actually in the literature, that actually talking raises SCL levels. We also think there's another factor here in that our participant was not a native speaker, a native English speaker, so communicating her frustrations, frankly, with the interfaces caused the SCL to raise in those conditions. Our participant is also an expert user and seemed to get in the zone when we were conducting a search. So you'll also note that the difficult searches, the searches the task we classed as difficult, had lower, though not significantly lower, SCLs, which indicates to us that what is difficult to us may not have been as difficult to her, and vice versa. There could have been language issues, there could have been terminology issues, we're not sure. Again, it's important I think it's important in our next study to norm these with a group of expert users and decide exactly what it is we mean by difficult. Okay. This is a look at our easiest versus the most difficult. And in this case, actually, the blue line represents one of the easy tasks. And this is actually our the government task. And so it was the same question, asked a little bit different, a little more difficult. Again, the one that was the most difficult had lower SCL than the one that we thought was the easiest. A lot of things could be happening here. One, the participant is getting used to the process by now, and has gotten comfortable. The other thing is that we also had this task 6 was much longer than the other task. the search phase by about 2 minutes, and so that could have decreased the average as well. It's hard to know what this means. One other thing was the other thing is that during the the task, our participant, being an expert searcher, became very critical of the way our search engines work. Indeed, found many problems with our interfaces and spent almost as much effort trying to deconstruct what was going on behind the scenes. Why weren't the algorithms working the way she wanted them to, and so on. So, you know, that was a factor too. So what happened in 6 is about halfway through, she kind of said, you know, I'm not going to. This is not working. And it's kind of funny because at about 6 minutes in, I gave a 3-minute warning, or 7 minutes, and I gave a 3-minute warning, and the SEL just dropped because essentially she quit. So you got to be very careful on how you use these measures. Go ahead. So what did we learn? We learned a lot. We learned search expertise makes a big difference. Again, our participant was focusing on the algorithms and the mechanics of search here because that's her area of expertise. So it's important to control for domain knowledge, I believe. It's also important to control for search expertise. I also would think that you would want to try to make it such that the tasks were of personal importance to the user, to the participant. So that raises their engagement level. And that can be done in a variety of ways. You could give them a number of choices, pick the topic that's most interesting to you, or whatnot. But I think that's important too. Task difficulty, as I mentioned before, needs to be normed using expert users, and then we need to decide what difficulty is. Because our assessment of difficulty didn't match hers at all. Indeed, she noted 4 of the 6 were supposed to be easy, and 3 of those were supposed to be the difficult ones. We also think that a learning phase would be useful to try to smooth out some of the SCL. As the user would get used to the interface, they might it might smooth the SCL a little bit as they get more comfortable with the environment. So what else do we learn? But physiological measures are awesome. We do think this is an exciting new area for human-computer interaction research, and in particular information search. We have so few measures to understand user state right now. We need to be able to address these, in particular because so many of our measures are limited to controlled experimental environments. If we could leverage these types of biophysical measures through implicit naturalistic studies, we can better assess how users really search and really work. They're also awkward to gather. They're difficult to analyze and interpret. It's hard to know if you see a rise on a graph. Does that mean anxiety? Does that mean engagement? Does that mean arousal? So it's important to triangulate those values with either other biophysical measures. So you might want to look at heart rate variability and other measures to try to make sense of that, as well as self-reports and even eye gaze or other methods. And those are some of the things that we do differently next time. So, we would try to design interfaces, we think, or tasks that would evoke maximum physiological response. One way would be to create tasks that engage the user. The other way would create to design interfaces that were maybe a little more exciting than the Yahoo search engine. So our next steps would be to do the study, start recruiting, see where it goes from there. Are there any questions?
What's the average latency between the stimulus and the response by the skin conductors?
When we were observing it, Gary, we saw between maybe 1 and 2 seconds.
Okay.
It was pretty stable.
Pretty quick.
Yeah. Indeed. For instance, we don't have screenshots of them, but we were noting times when the screens changed. So when a user moved from hitting the search button to receiving a list of results, or when they're focused on results and then they click one and go to another page, we were watching for rises there, and we were seeing them, and they were almost instantaneous. We did not gather data that closely to know exactly, to be able to measure exactly, but it was almost instantaneous.
And the same thing with it dissipating afterwards?
It depends. It depends, and I think there are a couple things going on there. In several instances, the user, the participant had to really focus to understand what this new page was showing her. So, for instance, a results list. She typed in a search. She saw those results. She had to make sense of them somehow, and so we might see it wouldn't taper off for 4 or 5, even 10 seconds in some cases.
And the actual leads on the hand, how did that sort of affect the typing and?
Thank you for asking. That it did affect typing a little bit, and you almost have to throw that data out if you were to look at that from a discrete stimulus response, because it really just becomes a jagged line as the user types. And she did mention that was an obstacle to her. It was unnatural. So I think that we would need to try to stabilize that somehow.
So now that you've done this, what would you feel comfortable with? How many subjects would you want to run before you were able to sort of feel confident about any kind of results you might get?
Right. Well, I think we would need to run another pilot with several users just to better understand the variables we're trying to control. I think it was the first experience for us in controlling task complexity. It was the first experience for us in controlling for the affordance latent interface design. So I'm sure that we were introducing variables we didn't even know we were introducing. So in our proposal, we think we could get statistical significance up to, I believe, is it 6 participants?
Probably more.
Probably more.
Probably around over 24, I would say.
Oh, for 24.
You need a big sample in order to get some sort of statistical significance with physiological responses.
I have a question.
Sure.
When you're recruiting the participants, would you consider their basal metabolic rate at any stage, because that directly affects the sweating? People with higher BMIs would sweat more than those with less, even though they're normal.
That's a good question. I don't know that you want to select for them, but you certainly would want to control for it. And you do that by normalizing, normalizing the means, and essentially comparing z-scores. I think you could do that way. Yeah. But that's a good question. Skin conductance level varies by, we know it varies by age. And there's the possibility it varies by different types of different populations.
And another thing was that there are certain medical conditions that also affect the perspiration rate of the skin, like hyperthyroidism and stuff like that, which you might want to consider to exclusion criteria or something.
That's good to know.
But basically what you do, the reason why you have the baseline is because you subtract your means for each specific task from that baseline for the specific person. So the basic metabolic rate wouldn't have an effect on your subsequent analysis. Because basically what you're doing is you're detecting the difference between the basic metabolic
BMR
rate, BMR, thank you, and any sort of peaks, or average peaks.
Okay.
And you're doing that across people.
Another way to control for that would be to triangulate with other measures too. Heart rate variability and blood pressure probably would be too. Yeah. Again, normalizing as you go.
Thank you.
Right, sure, good question.
Other questions, comments? All right, thank you very much.